On Easter Island, the centuries live side by side. Beyond the hula girls and flower lays, the welcoming songs and smiles, lie the relics of ancient, half-glimpsed mysteries. Here, a visitor from the present, I set foot on the endless continent of the past. Here, like an absent-minded tourist or a refugee fleeing disaster, the past has left its luggage. Images carved on stone, hollowed trumpet rocks of long-forgotten use. Stranded in time, the celebrated figures, or moai, still seem to be awaiting the return of the people who abandoned them.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There were 6, and one is
originally,
missing.
yes.
Is there any project to restore it?
No, it's broken into a great many pieces, and can't be reerected.
The one on the other side is eroded to almost nothing.
Yes, that one too was found in the sea.
It was found in the sea.
Like caverns under the sea, much of the island's history lies hidden. Yet it holds a clear and ominous warning for the citizens of a larger island, Earth itself.
Lost in the immense solitudes of the Pacific, 1,100 miles from the nearest inhabited island, and 2,300 miles from the South American coast, Easter Island is the Earth's loneliest habitation, and the most puzzling, a microcosm of the human story lost in silence. Mute celebrities of history, the great figures of Easter Island are witnesses to a past they cannot describe, yet a scale model of our own world lived and died here. Like unborn children, some statues were left blind by the world that conceived them. They are the cloned images of a civilization that finally destroyed its own habitat and died trying to repeat itself. In the quarries of Rano Raraku, unfinished effigies sleep out the centuries, awaiting slow dissolution in the wind and rain. But the voices of the living are no less oblivious to their past. Now subjects of Chile, the people of Pascua, as the island is called in Spanish, or Rapa Nui in Polynesian, have been overwhelmed by Western ways. They are hardly aware that for at least 1,000 years, isolated on a triangular island barely 9 miles by 13, their ancestors developed a unique miniature civilization with its own complex social forms, religions, technology, and written language. After rediscovery by the Dutch navigator Roger Veen on Easter Sunday, 1722, Western culture came like a blow. Peruvian slave traders and Yankee whalers raided the island. Smallpox swept the inhabitants. By 1877, from a population that once may have numbered 20,000, only 111 stunned survivors remained. Of earlier history and catastrophes, they knew almost nothing. But almost certainly the first settlers were lost seafarers from the islands of Polynesia far to the west.
When people are enclosed in a finite world like here, do you think that automatically they begin to dream about out of this world things that are impossible, which means gigantism?
There is something that I wonder. Do we have any idea of what the island looked like when the first people came in it?
Kainga mata paurito mahuna tera kenua. Taipeu te peta matu kainga mata mai haira te uringa hanga. Aue nuai, aue koroe, aue ngakope. Kainga mata paurito aue mahuna tera kenua kue. Aue
In a few of the island's songs, one can hear, across time and the encircling seas, the sound of a more distant voice, the echo of a deeper past. Kept purer by long isolation from other cultural influences, the earliest songs have been preserved only by the efforts of a few scholars and amateur enthusiasts. Among them, Dr. Ramon Campbell, the resident physician, who plays his recordings for Captain Cousteau.
It's amazing that I don't find any similarity with the Tahitian songs I heard.
Absolutely. For me, it was a great surprise when I recorded these chants in that year, and that first time. But I found it was absolutely different from Polynesian chants and music. I haven't found in no island in the Pacific something so. The analysis scientific of this music sounds that the music has more influence of Indian, and the poetry, the poems from the old poems of China.
Among the islanders themselves, no more than a handful still can remember the songs and sing them. For more than a century, explorers and anthropologists have tried to unravel the complex mysteries of Easter Island's cultural origins.
Tonga y Fiji es el principal para poblar las Marquesas. Pero de las Marquesas,
From the University of Santiago, Professor Jorge da Silva traces the probable pathways across the islands of Polynesia. The first migrants, says Professor da Silva, arrived perhaps as early as the 1st century, and certainly not later than King Hotamatua's band in the 7th. Starting at the Marquesas, from which Hawaii, Tahiti, and New Zealand also were populated, it is probable that the first settlers were seeking another landfall when winds drove them to Easter Island and left them there forever trapped. Fortunately, they had with them a few small animals and plants to found a colony. Petroglyphs of the canoes that brought them are described by anthropologist Robert Kroll.
Well, this is a petroglyph of a double-hulled, high-sterned Polynesian voyaging canoe, which was discovered during Dr. Malloy's expedition in 1974. I'll just briefly outline with my fingers what this petroglyph shows. The canoe starts here. This is the hull of the canoe. And these lines going up here represent the high stern of the canoe where the chieftain, the king, or Ariki rode.
Dr. William Malloy, noted authority on Easter Island, tells Cousteau the statues are not as stylized as one might think.
Well, within the framework of the stylized form, it's the local nose. The local people are like this.
You say the people of the country look like that?
Very much. That is, the statues, in a sense, are sort of a caricature or highly stylized, but they're highly stylized representations of the local people. And you can find many islanders who are very similar to this in appearance.
Now, there are statues all over the place here near the factory. How many do you guess there are here?
Oh, I think about 260.
260
that are visible now.
Here in the quarry?
That's right. A great many more are buried below the surface. Many, many more.
Why below the surface?
The talus, of course, has gradually fallen down here and covered up a great many. This is a good example of one stage in the carving process. The statues were first carved by carving a trench around the block that was to become the statue. Then the upper part of the statue was carved, and eventually they carved the underside, leaving the statue supported on a long, narrow keel, which was eventually picked away.
How did they do that?
And
simply,
well, the bottom part was filled with earth and rubble. And then small areas were taken away and picked away and replaced until finally the statue was freed and it was ready to move down the slope to its hole in the ground.
Not gods, but family portraits of ancestors conveying mana or spiritual power. The great moai, often 15 tons of stone, were placed on sledges of wood, then plentiful, and pulled to their sites by cables of twisted fiber.
You get the impression here, particularly in this area, of a tremendous population. People frantic to use every last square meter of land.
Because of what?
Because of overpopulation.
How many were there here?
This is a very difficult question to answer, but certainly many thousands.
Many thousands.
Many thousands.
On this
small island.
The questions multiply. What ravaged this once fertile and wooded island? What purpose required the carving of an estimated 1,000 giant figures? What compulsion would throw them down? Seeking clearer answers, Cousteau summoned his exploration team, headed by son Philippe. On the north side of the island, near a statue restored by Thor Heyerdahl, Philippe and his companions set up base camp. Here, on the island's only beach, King Hotumatua and his Polynesians are believed to have landed in the late 7th century. Bringing only a few chickens and plants, Hotumatua's people survived for more than 1,000 years. Though Philippe's party plans a shorter stay, it brings in a wide array of rafts, motors, air tanks, and technical equipment for a multi-pronged survey.
In weeks to come, we will range the entire island and its underwater environment. We will traverse the almost roadless landscape by horse, despite mutual distrust. We will climb the precipitous cliffs that rise as high as 600 feet in a bastion against the sea, explore the caves that tunnel the porous volcanic rock almost everywhere. For a bird's eye view, I will take to the air in a complete search of possible clues to the island's true story. The Zodiac, the diver's rubber support craft, is carefully ready for the rough coastal waters of Rapa Nui. For aerial surveys, a dismantled gyrocopter is brought to the island and is there assembled. On it, a local artist paints an appropriate symbol, the figure of Tangata Manu, or so-called Birdman, whose cult dominated the island for 200 years after the overthrow of the great stone figures in the 17th century. Strapped into the skeletal craft, I prepare to test the gyrocopter on its maiden flight. Beneath me, ceremonial platforms, or ahus, line the forbidding coast. Built with great and prolonged labor, their meaning and function are still unclear. Though at some, there are evidence of crematoriums for the burning of the dead. Some scholars have speculated that the stone figures may have been transported around the island on reed boats, on the theory that if such a method had been used, some statues surely would have been lost in the sea. We prepare to search the bottom. Beneath the surface, all is still. At first, our pearlescent lights reveal little, only a ghostly emptiness. Almost in surprise, we touch the sandy bottom, the submerged platform 30 to 40 fathoms deep, which extends outward for several miles before it drops to the abyssal depths of the Pacific. The shapes that loom from the bottom seem vaguely familiar. For an instant, we believe we may have found the sunken statues for which we are searching. But closer examination reveals no more than the eroded block of volcanic tufa encrusted with sea growth. Though the legend persists that Easter Island is the remaining fragment of a sunken continent, all evidence indicates that it is volcanic in origin, built up by successive eruptions from the ocean floor. On shore, crossing the barren landscape, the members of the team sometimes have an eerie sense of having moved backward in time. As it might to detectives studying the furnishing of an abandoned room, the past abruptly becomes present. Shadowy, forgotten events, again palpable and real. In this sunlit vacancy, we seem to hear the clamor of voices dead for 1,000 years.
Everywhere, like hurried prayers, lies an illustrated litany of stone. Petroglyphs of birdmen and flowers, of fish and turtles, of 100 other fantastic shapes and figures. Clearly, the caves that honeycomb the porous volcanic rock were made to serve some human purpose. In most of the 200 caverns explored, the team finds skeletons and relics. Professor De Silva explains that as the island was progressively denuded of its timber and wood became scarce, the increasing population was forced to make its homes in natural shelters, living and dying in this and similar caves scattered throughout the island.
On y est à peu près. La caméra est prête.
puzzled by the fact that an island which once supported thousands today cannot sustain a population of 1,600. Cousteau investigates possible causes. Among them, the possibility that there was once a shift in the level of the island. With other team members, he prepares to study the surrounding sea floor.
As we leave the support craft suspended at the surface above us, it is quickly apparent that the shelf around the island is a submerged desert, as if somehow the impoverishment of the land above were a cancerous disease spreading its domain outward farther and farther, year by year. Here and there a few fish move through the depths, yet without a surrounding reef, as in other Pacific atolls, they must have been very difficult for the early settlers to catch. Beneath the sea, grottos and caves reach back into the rock, sometimes rising above sea level, trapped pockets of air in the congealed mass. They are much like the chambers explored from the surface of the island, subterranean channels formed as the volcanic tufa cooled. Yet, in one particular, they are totally different. The caverns approached beneath the surface hold no sign of human habitation. Clearly, they were submerged long before the first people came to Rapa Nui. Again, as in 100 other places in the past, I am reminded that the Earth is a living body, an interlocking system of delicately balanced forces, endlessly changing, the sea and the cliff, the tree and the desert. Perhaps here on Easter Island, as elsewhere, man intruded upon a natural process, discovered too late that in nature, the injuries we inflict are not always self-healing or even curable.
Even from the air, the island now seems poor and arid, with sparse vegetation and only a few trees planted here and there since its rediscovery. Yet there are many evidences that the earliest arrivals found flourishing woodlands. When traced or rubbed by crayon, the petroglyphs themselves reveal images of flowers and large trees which once were common. Professor Da Silva tells Cousteau what the vegetation must have been in early times.
The flowers and the tea.
And the tree.
And the tea is the only tea and the only flowers in the whole petroglyph of the island, no? This is beautiful. No? And very important for the history. No?
I think so.
Yeah.
It's a big tree.
Yes, it's a big tree.
And when the island was rediscovered, there were practically no tree left.
Yes.
Calypso.
At the Island Museum, Dr. Malloy describes other valuable artifacts, all made of wood.
Of course, one of the most remarkable things about Easter Island is the fact that it demonstrates a characteristic very definitely on the borders of civilization, and so unusual as to be almost unique in a context of this kind. These people had a written language, which they inscribed on wooden tablets, such as the ones that we have here. This, of course, is a hieroglyphic language. It's never been deciphered completely, although some very fine linguists are working on it. And we really don't know what it says, but it represents one of the real mysteries of Easter Island. Not only the fact of its existence, but why a community as small as this one would have needed a written language.
And they are printed on both sides, engraved on both sides.
On both sides. In a very curious way, incidentally, which is called reversed boustrophodon. You start out here with the first line of characters, right side up, run to the end of the line, then the line continues upside down and in the opposite direction. So the tablet is read this way. Curiously enough, then when you read it, you have to read the first line, turn it upside down for the second line, turn it back again right side up for the third line, and so forth. The reading is a continuous process of reversing the tablet.
Sometimes burned as fuel or as vestiges of paganism, few writing tablets remain today. Perhaps used as storytellers' cue sheets, their minutely carved hieroglyphs bear a striking resemblance to written symbols from the Indus Valley in southern Asia. The riddles are hardly less impenetrable than the fog, which now, with the changing season, entraps the exploring team. Isolated by sea and space, the island now is trapped in a cycle of storms. The camp threatened by the buffeting wind, Jacques Cousteau sends a worried summons to the men in the field.
Le bâche orange qui a les trous dans les deux côtés, là.
Swiftly, the men return, anchor the tents, secure the camp. Similarly, the early settlers on this lonely shard of land must have dug in against the weather, but they could not secure against a greater threat, themselves. Prisoners of each other, isolated and unable to keep peace within their minute world, the islanders could only dream of escape. Its symbol, a birdman fashioned after the Manutara, a far-ranging tern. In it, after the overthrow of the giant figures, the people found a new cult, a new tyranny of the strongest. To the offshore island where the Manutara nested went an annual race for power. Here at Orongo, the chief whose swimmer brought back the first egg was made the birdman for the ensuing year.
Do you have any idea the size of these people?
Well, they were very tall.
They were very tall?
Polynesians are one of the tallest races.
Dr. Gonzalo Figueroa tells Philippe of the birdman cult.
The chiefs and the priestesses of the different lineages used to come here every year by the beginning of the spring. And they stayed here while their representative of these chiefs, went to the islands in front here. Those representatives, which were the best swimmers, had to get the first egg of the Manutara, which is the sooty tern, while the chiefs and the priestesses were having ceremonies here, which were connected with the cult of fertility. The swimmers waited until one of them managed to get the first egg. Then he swam back, and his chief would become immediately the Tangata Manu, or the birdman. That gave this man and his lineage or tribe a lot of power, magic and religious power, which they used to make war to other lineages and other tribes. These other tribes and lineages were very much scared of the special power this chief obtained by becoming the Tangata Manu, or birdman.
Was that the beginning of the history of the island?
No, apparently this cult had the biggest importance by the time the old culture, the old forms, the old gods were in decadence. The former, the highest god was Makemake, who was the god of natural forces, the creator god.
Today, no islander can remember the names of all the gods who once thronged their pantheon of deities, many of whom assumed the shapes of plants or animals. The image of Makemake, most powerful and familiar of the early gods, here is taken from a stone in a dubbing process illustrated by Robert Kroll. Unlike many primitive peoples, the Easter Islanders had no devil or Satan, no god of evil. That, they believed, they brought upon themselves. They could only pray to escape the human evil around them. As if sheer repetition would give reality to their clamoring hopes, the island's rocks now were crowded with petroglyphs of the birdman.
Architecture of the type represented by the large open-air altars that we see being restored here has a considerable antiquity on Easter Island. The earliest radiocarbon date that we have for any of these structures is 690, years after Christ. And it represents one in which most of the details of the local architecture and local stylization are already well formed. So we would expect that architecture of this kind probably dates some centuries before this. It appears to have started out in a rather modest way from prototypes, maraes that is, known very widely in Polynesia, but to have undergone on this island a rather unusually intense fluorescence. Certainly the most remarkable religious building compulsion that we find anywhere in Polynesia. As time went on, these structures became more and more frequently made. Eventually, they lined all the coast of the island. Many statues were placed on them, and finally, some of them spilled over into the interior. It was an architectural fluorescence then that increased in intensity through time, until sometime late in the 1600s, when the largest statues were being carved and the largest open-air altars were being made. And at this time, for reasons that are still somewhat obscure, the island seems to have blown up in a blaze of internal warfare, perhaps because of the demands made by the priestly class for aku construction, for statue carving, the transportation of statues, the building of aku, and all of the ceremonial life associated with them. In any event, it seems to have ended about this time, and most of these structures were destroyed and their characteristic covered up by piles of stone.
Wasting energies on totally useless production, exhausting natural resources, confronting overpopulation and food shortage, the island's social order collapsed. In violence and chaos, the great images, symbols of an older and now hated order, were cast down, their necks broken.
Well, in this period of depletion of the natural resources and of heavy population, that as I was telling you, correlates with the period in which this cult took place. Conditions of life were really very hard on the island. People were fighting each other, and this meant that a quite big increase in cannibalism took place. People were hunting people all the time. The areas for fishing, the areas for cultivation were very much well fixed, and the people belonging to one lineage or one family were watching that their resources were respected and not intruded by others. And when others intruded, well, they were killed and eaten.
The greatest relic still remains in the quarry at Rano Raraku.
This is the largest statue in the quarry, about 22 meters long, and it weighs of the order of about 400 tons. Certainly a remarkable job. I think this may very well have been the one that when the workers saw it, they said, "This is enough. No more."
That's too much for them.
This may have been the thing that caused the whole disintegration of the statue cult.
And you think the reason why the civilization ended up abruptly was because of that? Because
I think it finally reached a crisis on this particular level. And the culture had to change in order to survive. And it apparently did with the development of a new religious cult that appears to have been considerably easier to support. The cult of the Manutā, the bird cult.
The birdman.
The birdman cult.
Because often the traces of prehistory are more visible from the air than on the ground, Philippe makes frequent aerial tours of the island. After weeks of exploration, he again takes off on a reconnaissance. At this time, the flight will end in personal disaster. With engine failure at 300 feet, Philippe and the gyrocopter crashed to Earth not far from the island's leper colony. There, found by the lepers, Philippe is finally brought to medical assistance. Later, in the twilight, Michael Sullivan and Dominique Soumian come to examine the crash site. The gyrocopter lies shattered beyond repair, a memento that human technology, no less than other gods, can also fail. Hardly less injured, Philippe Cousteau will survive, and after repeated medical intervention on the mainland, mend and again be almost as good as new. His work nearly completed, he leaves, ironically by air. The island whose inhabitants, caught in a wider tragedy, once dreamed of a similar escape. Even the sea, which had kept them chance prisoners, today is more open to the divers than it was to them. Now, without Philippe, the team descends for a final reconnaissance of the underwater world whose food resource was progressively denied the islanders as wood for boats became scarcer and finally unobtainable. On land, another world was coming to an end as men slaughtered each other in hunger and hatred. But here in these submerged pastures of the sea, there still remained at least an illusion of some calm and natural order. Here too, predator and prey exist side by side in ever-fluctuating balance. Instinctual partisans who, unlike man, seldom escape their role. But fish do not build cathedrals.
I'm about to leave, and I'm pretty sad.
Well, this island has a sad story to tell in many ways. It's the whole picture, of course, of an advanced culture that developed in remarkable isolation and came, of course, within a hair's breadth of destruction.
Spectral figures on the barren landscape, the giant statues once may have conferred mana or spiritual power from some ancestor upon his clan descendants. But mana requires belief, and today there are no believers on Easter Island. Mindless relics of a faith that failed, their eyes mirror neither memory nor hope.
History is filled with melancholy parables, and Easter Island is one of them. A reminder that the resources of our island Earth are no less finite, a reminder that man's unparalleled creative gift seems fatally linked to its own self-destruct mechanism. Here in the endless sea, a vagrant cell of human life anchored itself, created a civilization, and vanished, leaving a handful of survivors with no conscious recollection that it had ever happened. Yet, if man is at least in part invented by himself, if living generations were born out of the imaginations of men long dead, then the choices remain. Shall we, islanders no less than they, pass on the riches of human invention and wisdom to living inheritors, or to mindless relics that mock all that was possible? Perhaps the islanders were right. We are not victims of a god of evil. We are victims only of the evil we bring upon ourselves.